Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jensup Chakchai Bankard, and I'm here with El Mal. First, he's wondering if this bag over his head is really necessary. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
I want to love the girl I wasn't allowed to be. I want to love the grandmother I might become. I want to love myself every day, every hour, every second. I'm enough. That's all. That's what it is to be a woman, isn't it? I want to love myself the way I want to be loved. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I guess I deserve that because I told you not to pick a bunch of other things to say. All right, way to set the tone. And he's been practicing his machine gun choreography. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
If redemption was easy, Jen, everyone would seek it. I'm good. Although, do we have time for an episode after PT's quote? I feel like you just got to wrap it up. We got to close it down.
I know. I was like, oh, wait. And then there's more. And then there's more. And last but not least, está de acuerdo con sus colegas de la fiscalía. He's in agreement with his prosecution colleagues. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you doing, Antonio?
PT, I've been a lawyer since I'm 23. Knew there were better things for me to be. I'll never be guilty. PT, your criticisms are a waste of time. Even Jasmine thinks that you must be high. You better change your mind. You better change your mind. You better change your mind. I'm doing great. I'm ready. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if we can record now. This broke me. You wrote your own lyrics, like, well done, bravo, bravissimo. Well, that's Italian, not Spanish. Okay, so listeners, if you're still with us, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Emilia Pérez, which is streaming on Netflix right now. It's kind of rare for us to be able to say that. Usually we're covering movies that are in the theaters, but it's a Netflix movie, so it's there for you to watch. It dropped last week and has already been extremely divisive amongst critics and audiences. The internet's on fire with this movie. It's a musical about a burnt-out lawyer named Rita who gets a consequential job offer from a Mexican drug cartel leader. And that is not even like the tip of the iceberg, folks, about this, what's going on in this movie. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen Emilia Pérez. And then, with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners want to take our case after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If you don't want to miss any new songs about me, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on regular podcast providers like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and many more. You can also find us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. You can also now find us on Blue Sky at The Long Take Review. I'm the only one there, I think, but it exists. It has like 3 posts from the last 2 episodes.
You're breaking this news live to all.
This is breaking news. This is the last positive thing I have to say this episode. We're also on Letterboxd at LTR Pod. The account is at LTR Pod. You can also search for the hashtag LTR Pod, and you can find each of our individual reviews there. Jen.
Thanks, PT. I'm just bracing myself for what's to come. So we're going to start, as usual, with our short take. So what was I have an inkling. What is everyone's general reaction to Emilia Pérez? I guess, Antonio, you wrote new lyrics to a song for this. So let's start with you.
We all remember from Emilia Pérez.
I love the song. I remember the song. I've been listening to certain songs with my kids, and so they remember certain tunes. At any rate, I think I'm the highest on this. I thought it was wildly original and propulsive and moving and highly entertaining. I thought it took its audacious premise and mined it for all that it's worth and really showcased its central actresses really brilliantly. It plays with form and genre in effective and I think interesting ways. And it's a musical unlike any I've ever seen before. In a lot of musicals, the screenplay acts as a bridge to the songs. But here I thought the songs act as a kind of outlet, or organic outlet for its larger than life situations and characters. I thought it was really fascinating from the first frame on, and I still hear some of its music. I still have some of its images seared in my memory. So, so this is a wildly divisive film. So we're going to go from me to the nonsense that that PT is about to say.
Beautiful. Well, I do need to walk back something I said earlier, that there'd be nothing positive.
Okay.
I have plenty of, I think, positive things to say, mostly rooted in the performances that I think are excellent, and the movies we're seeing for the performers that that work that I think work really well, especially Zoe Saldana, and I need to double check the name here, Carla Sofia Gascon as the two main characters. I think are really incredible. Visually, it is super interesting. I have historically said, and it is known amongst my colleagues here, and also for people who may be listening, that I don't particularly care for musicals. We can get into that later. I did leave the movie with the thought of that I frequently have with a movie musical when I don't connect with the songs and the form, which is this would have been better if it weren't a musical. As time has gone on and I've thought about that, I need to walk that back, because I think without the songs, it would be even clearer that the story is really disjointed and doesn't like really come together, and is just like a series of unfinished thoughts and sort of like character concepts that don't really connect or go anywhere, and sometimes are actually like a pretty big issue in terms of how they are executed. So yeah, I in the end, I'm glad that I saw it. I think people should see it. I did not particularly like it, and I will do my best to not spend this whole episode talking about all the things that I didn't like, because many people did like it, but I didn't particularly like it, and I'm ready to talk about some things that I didn't like. Let's hand it over to Greg, someone who I think is more on Antonio's side.
I think I'm probably somewhere between you two. I'm going to say my primary reaction to this was that I really wish I'd seen it in the theater. I had wanted to make it on its limited theatrical run, and it got pushed aside by other things that were more limited. And it's always hard when it's going to be on Netflix very soon to kind of justify the ticket price and the night out and so on. So I immediately, when I was watching this at home and doing my typical, like, I'm here and I'm watching this, but I'm also, tending to children or also trying to move things around my house, I was immediately like, this deserves my full attention, and it is not getting my full attention. So everything I say should be taken with a grain of salt. As I've said about other films, I love big swings, and this is a huge swing. Every kind of choice made by this set of filmmakers really is like, let's be big, let's be audacious. I thought there were many moments where you could imagine crowds of people getting angry, and they were like, who cares? Let's just do it. Let's just tell our story our way and not worry about what the reaction will be. And I really loved those aspects of it. I think I'm not going to say it's a huge home run, because I'm not sure I completely got all the pieces coalescing together and making this kind of beautiful operatic whole that felt like it was like in spitting distance. It just didn't quite get there for me. And so I really kind of, if that was my half attention, or if that was, not being totally immersed, I'm ready to admit that. But I will say, not to steal from recommendation algorithm, but I would say that I could not possibly recommend the performances more, particularly the lead, which you mentioned, in Zoe Saldana, which, how fantastic to see her not blue or green, but just her actual skin tone, and actually doing really good acting. And there were times in this, I mean, she's beautiful and she looks beautiful most of the time, but then there are times that they make her look haggard and tired, and you're like, she's just really going for it, and she's everywhere. So it was really, really a great performance, and I was excited about that. Jen, have we saved anything for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start by kind of co-signing I'm not sure this all hangs together in the end. And for me in particular, the third act kind of goes off the rails or it really is like once you step back and think about all the different things that this movie is trying to touch on. I understand the criticism that it's kind of skimming the surface because the story is so sprawling and it's trying to kind of take on so many different things that it's hard to see how it all threads together, I think. That said, I was really vibing with the energy of this movie. I really enjoyed the music. I've actually been listening to the soundtrack just on its own as I like commute to work and stuff like that. And it's definitely holds up. I think I definitely like some songs better than others, but it to me it has kind of the energy and the verve of, at least musically, of like a Hamilton or something that a lot of people universally like as opposed to divisively like and not like. I enjoyed watching this movie a lot, but I totally understand sort of some of the question marks in terms of the cohesion. I do think, and maybe this is what transitions us officially, not unofficially like Greg, but officially to recommendation algorithm. And I'll say that once I realized that this film was more than anything else, it's a lot of things, but more than anything else, it is an opera. Then a lot of the choices and actually a lot of the criticisms that people were having or negative reactions that people were having made a lot more sense because I think the plot suddenly clicks into place. Like and that I think above all else is what's motivating all the choices in this movie and things that I think people are assuming should be the central point of the movie are actually just means to the operatic ends. And I think that's where kind of, if I had to come up with a theory as to like why a bunch of people don't like this movie, I think that might be what it is. And so I'm excited to talk about that in more depth during spoiler mode. But to me, this, I said Hamilton earlier, partly that's because there's a lot of spoken song in this, like a lot of kind of rap, like kind of like spoken word kind of sing, goes back and forth between singing and speaking rhythmically. But I think in terms of the what the songs are doing and the functions of the songs in the film, I think it's much closer to something like Les Mis, which is kind of on the spectrum of operatic versus kind of Broadway, in different flavors of musical, that's the one that's closest to opera. Les Mis, or actually this film reminded me a ton of, I don't know if anyone saw the Evita film in 1996. It starred Madonna and Antonio Banderas and Jonathan Pryce, a young Jonathan Pryce. That movie, I was 13 when that movie came out, and I have the entire soundtrack memorized because I listened to it so much.
And it goes a little something like this.
I don't have as nice a voice as Antonio, so I'm not going to sing. But I went and looked at the Letterboxd reviews for that film, and apparently some of the problems or complaints about this film, Emilia Pérez, kind of apply to Evita too. So like, I don't know if there's just some like primal, like I saw like this style of movie musical that just like really appeals to me. But it's like, what I mean is that the songs are kind of like staging the dialogue between characters where they're talking to each other, but they're really singing. So I think you have to be, if I'm going to contribute to recommendation algorithm, like I think you have to be on board with that as a concept, that songs in the movie like this are supposed to take the place of conversation.
So you think there's people on Letterboxd who have a problem with famous Argentinian performers Madonna, Antonio Banderas, and Jonathan Pryce in Evita?
Yeah, which 13-year-old me would have had no clue about, right? I would not. I just was like happy that they were singing to each other. Antonio Banderas, to be fair, very good because he's like the narrator character in that movie. Very charming.
Madonna famously won the Golden Globe that year for Best Actress over Frances McDormand, but then wasn't nominated for an Oscar. I watched that movie. The thing with Evita, though, is that almost everything is sung in Evita, right? There's a lot more spoken dialogue in this movie. But as soon as you said it, I was like, that makes sense as a comp. Yeah.
And I don't mean to conflate Mexico with Argentina. Like, let me make that clear. Maybe in my subconscious, it's like, oh, well, they're both like, because there's actually no Spanish language in Evita, I think. So like, there's something about the musicality of it that I find to be very, very similar. So that's my comp.
Andrew Lloyd Webber also is a much more on the nose sort of like lyricist, like classic like, musical theater people. So, and Emilia Pérez is pretty on the nose with a lot of its lyrics too. So there are a lot of things that actually link them. I think that there are certain movies that, like, I think that to like this movie, I don't know that you necessarily have to like musicals, but you have to be open to the film's like experiments and its excesses. There are certain movies that don't ask much of you other than to sort of sit back and enjoy the ride. They're tightly crafted and they're familiar and they're executed perfectly. Like Hitman is like an example of that for me. I thought that movie was just like so incredibly well done. Um, but then there are movies that are challenging and strange and require you to surrender to the movie's magic rather than to resist all the ways in which it deviates from what you expect or what you want. And that for me was like, this year was like, I Saw the TV Glow as sort of a classic example of that. Um, so what do you all think for recommendations? I can't think of a better comp than Evita. So, but the rest of you.
Okay, I am not quite as long as my opening quote, but I'll take a little bit of time here to defend the anti-musical people, the people who don't like musicals, or at least to explain why I generally don't like musicals. And to do so, I wanted to give a little praise and also a little critique to this one. One big reason, but as I've thought about it, why I don't really care for musicals is I don't really like the genre of performance that usually comes from the singing in musicals, and that's just like when I think of show tunes, I am like displeased. There are composers, and actually Andrew Lloyd Webber is a really good example of like, oh yeah, I don't like his songs. Like I don't like those songs, and I don't like the way that people perform his songs. I don't like the way that those kind of performances are grafted onto other better songs written by other people when sung in the context of show tunes. This also bled into a lot of singing competition shows. So like American Idol, The Voice, I feel like is a lot of show tunes people ruining good songs by singing them like show tunes. There are there's musical composers I really like. Of Stephen Sondheim generally, if his name's on it, I'm like, good, let's go. I'm ready. Like, let's go and do that. So, I don't mean to say that like there's no possible way. And this movie does not have songs like that. I don't feel like this movie has like the show tuney songs. The songs are interesting and different enough. I won't say I found any of them memorable. When I watched the movie, I did go see it in the theaters. I listened to the soundtrack a little bit yesterday, and I was like, none of these songs are anything to me. I recall some visuals, and I can make some connections with the visuals, but the songs, it's all pops and whizzes to me. But that said, like in this sense, it's not that show. If the reason you don't like musicals is that show tune theater kid style, this may not be a problem for you. The other issue, which I think is an issue for me, which maybe, hey Henry, which maybe coincides with or is in contrast, I should say. The other issue maybe is in contrast with the things that some of you like about this is that it frequently ends up feeling like, especially in a movie as opposed to a stage play, that it's like, it's sort of this meeting could have been an email. It's like this song could have been 15 seconds of acting. Like, why are we spending 3.5 minutes saying what is happening instead of like a little moment where you display this with acting and then move on? It's saying instead of, or it's telling instead of showing. And I just generally find that frustrating. And that was where I was basically every song in this movie was just like, cool. Like this could have been like 20 seconds and it would have been more impactful. We can get to it in spoiler mode if we want to. We probably don't. But like every time there was a song that I found impactful, I was like, yeah, this would have been a silent moment that said the same thing would have impacted me way more. So that's a problem in terms of musicals. And again, it's my problem more than it's the musical's problem. I will just note that for people, we're talking about recommendation algorithm. If that's a thing that you don't like about musicals, I don't know if this one is going to change your mind on it. All that being said, I have seen the Evita comp. I've seen it in a very critical way because people are like, yeah, Evita is like an outside colonizer's attempt of doing it. And this is a French man making a movie about Mexico. So it's like, yep, that tracks. That's exactly what this is. So I've seen that. The other comparison that I saw, which I do think sort of makes sense, is Across the Universe, which takes a lot of these very visual things and also has a lot of story ideas that like don't really go anywhere and kind of just like peter out because like it's not really like a narrative so much as it's a reason to sing a bunch of these songs. And I will note here that is one of Jasmine's favorite movies. We talked about the concept of the Letterboxd top 4 and how it's like the MySpace top 8, and that's like you have to choose 4 movies, and she immediately had 2 that she was like bam bam, and one of them was Across the Universe. So she loves that movie and thinks that the performances of the songs in that movie are better than the performances by the Beatles. And that's a very difficult thing. We've worked through it.
What is happening?
Look, so like all that is to say, she's much more in that she loves that show tunes performance of songs, and that's a real just like that helped lock me into like right. I want to hear a rock band sing these songs. I don't want to hear Jim Sturgis sing them. And Jasmine is like, I will listen to Jim Sturgis every day for the rest of my life if it means I can hear him sing.
I was going to ask, does she like Moulin Rouge?
No, she hates Moulin Rouge. She thinks it's dumb and boring.
Now I'm even more confused. Go ahead.
I think I say that, but now she's not here and she's not listening through the door and then sending me a text to correct me. So maybe she like, but my memory is she does not like Moulin Rouge. I think that's something about a performance in that movie. But I'm not fully certain. Antonio, I'll take your question next.
My question is this.
Megalopolis flashbacks.
The most Broadway kind of song, I think, in recent memory on film was in the movie Dreamgirls. It's Jennifer Hudson's and I'm Telling You I'm Not Going. So for that song in particular, which is delivered in a very Broadway kind of way, right? Are you saying that what she gave in that particular song, that could have been 20 seconds of like, I don't know, like a close up of her face or just dialogue or something, that didn't have the requisite impact to be worthy like that song?
The best answer I have for that is I've never watched Dreamgirls.
Okay.
So I have no idea. However, my guess is that like probably not. Like that probably is like, I'm not saying that it's always the case. But I am saying in this movie, it was always the case. And the times when it wasn't, where I didn't feel that way, were the times like Jen was saying, when it was like the songs were dialogue, which is interesting. When they were in English, they were always clunky and I didn't like them. When they were in Spanish, I was like, well, I don't really know how awful these words are put together, because despite all my days of Duolingo, I'm really just reading the subtitles and I'm just kind of following the rhythms. So like, sure, okay, that's kind of fun. But I will say that because like I will contrast that it isn't like Hamilton, because Hamilton really is like an opera. I think there's only like 9 spoken lines in Hamilton and everything else is sung, that like it doesn't have that, again, a problem for me, which is like, why are we going to a song now? Like, why have we left dialogue and left people speaking and gone to a song? And it always feels like it should be, because something is like bubbling up to the point where I just need to get it out that way. And I maybe it's because the characters never really felt developed in this movie. I never felt anyone needing to sing a song. It just felt like, we got to do a cool production number. It's time. So we're going to go and do that, instead of like it coming from the characters. For me, Greg, what did you think? Who do you want to recommend this to?
Oh my God, we're still in recommendation algorithm?
We are. We got to move on, but so make it quick.
I only have one more segment and then I'm done for the rest of the episode.
This episode turned to why PT hates musicals.
I think it's important.
Well, I did want to note, I was on my commute home today. I was listening to Mike Birbiglia's podcast, and he had on Lin-Manuel Miranda, he of Hamilton and The Scuttlebutt. And Lin-Manuel Miranda was talking about his new project, which is he did a concept album which adapts The Warriors. So it's a concept hip hop album, and it has like Lauryn Hill on it, and it sounds incredible. I haven't gotten to listen to it yet. But he was talking about how adapting an action movie, he realized that there's just this shared problem between action movies, musicals and pornography, which is that the dialogue really doesn't matter. You're just getting to that heightened state. And the heightened state is different in all three. And I think we can fill in the blanks: singing, punching, and so that so I fully lost Jen, not as a co-host, but as a friend, just in that moment. I saw it in her eyes.
That's the new recommendation algorithm's noise. But like just that over and over.
So I did kind of have when he made those jokes, and they were jokes, it really reminded me, like, that's what this movie is doing, that it's supposed to be, I believe, when an emotion reaches a point that the characters could no longer vocalize it in words, they have to slide into a song. And that helped me kind of piece together for myself how I thought this musical was working a little bit, and how it could be there. I think I'm going to be the most basic in the group and say the film that I thought about a lot was Bardo. And not just because they're both Mexican, but because there was this touch of the surreal and the outlandish and parts where I kind of couldn't believe what I was watching. I think Bardo felt more self-indulgent because the creator was telling the story of himself and like version of who he wanted to be or is, or who knows that line. But I found myself thinking a lot about, putting the two in Mexico and thinking about Mexican heritage and culture as a part of magical realism, and the kind of ways in which those lines are defined differently in Mexican culture than they are in American culture. And it just made me think that maybe what my disconnect was from really getting it, and I know this is a French filmmaker, just acknowledge, but I also just feel like there's something there that, like, it doesn't speak to me because I haven't been trained to think about the world in that way, right? I don't have the apparatus for seeing this magic in the world, and so I'm cynical and dark. I'm just using me because I can't diagnose PT fairly over the microphone, but I'll say yes, I couldn't see the life and the verve here because it was a little more difficult. I have never seen Argentina, and I know that makes you feel bad, Jen, but don't cry for me, Tina. Go ahead.
That was actually much more eloquent than me just saying, PT, what sort of emotionally repressed life must you lead to not understand why someone just has to break out into song sometimes. But I think we do need to move on to spoiler mode. So if you have not seen Emilia Pérez and you do not want it spoiled, hopefully our confusing conversation about it so far has piqued your interest at the very least, so that you want to check out what we're talking about. But if you do not want it spoiled, and there is a lot to spoil in this one, I would say, just based on I had a hard time writing a premise that didn't inherently have spoilers at the top of the show. So the show, go watch the film on Netflix and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. Okay, so we've said many times that this film has been very divisive. I'd say more divisive as more people have seen it. I think the post-Netflix drop seems to have really caught fire compared to sort of when critics were looking at the film during the film festival circuit. So why do we think that is? Like, our own reactions to the movie aside, kind of like, what is our diagnosis of, like, why are so many people widely differing on this movie?
Well, I mean, I think we're in spoiler mode, so I think we can get right to that. The part of the plot we didn't want to talk about before is that it's the lawyer, Zoe Saldana's lawyer, is hired by a Mexican cartel kingpin who is like, I've actually, like, I need to do gender confirmation surgery. And I'm going to become Emilia Pérez. Like, I need to, like, become that person. That's the person who I am. And like, the fact that I don't know if that's actually what that person thinks, because that's not clear. Like, more so than this is Jacques Audiard, a Frenchman, writing about Mexico. It's Jacques Audiard, a cis man, writing about a trans woman. And I think a lot of people are just like, nope, I don't like that. Plus, maybe like me, not liking musicals, and like Antonio and to a degree Greg were saying, also like not really paying attention and not taking the real ride because it's on Netflix and they're not like fully locked in, and it's like, what's going on? Like, I don't like this. When you do need to like be there and be locked in to like have any hope of being swept up in what's going on. So I think it's a combination of those things.
I mean, Greg talked about it. It takes a lot of big swings. It has several wild turns. Its volume is always turned up at 10. So you're either going to be really into it, or you're going to really hate it, basically, right? And so I don't know. For me, that's an exciting piece of art, and that's an exciting thing to talk about. There's a lot of art that's like fine, right? That's just that tells a familiar story and then does it in a competent way, and it's perfectly fine on a plane ride to go home for Thanksgiving, but it's not something that's worth like having an extended discussion about. So like I think that the divisiveness actually means that it's succeeded as a piece of art, and that if people, I'd rather make something that people either really loved or really hated than something that people were just ambivalent toward. So I think that's built into its own ambitions, and I think that was part of it shows like a lack of caution on the part of all the people involved with this, that I think is laudable. But I understand that some people might not like the art itself.
I'm sorry. Was that Antonio or Francis Ford Coppola from the Megalopolis Q&A? It was pretty close. Okay. It was pretty close to what he said.
Okay,
all right.
This movie is not Megalopolis, okay?
No, absolutely not. And certainly just because
Less
I've
made
Megalopolis jokes, we don't need to talk about it any further. It is on digital now, so if people missed it, I think you can. I was struck that they were still charging the full $25. I'm like, I don't know that anybody's rushing out to pay the full $25 for it. I think everything that you just said is right. And PT's comments remind us, I think some of us on the call have kind of deep theater kid DNA in us somewhere that, we participated or were a part of the cliques that did. I was not an actor. I was the lighting technician. Thank you. And so, but we're kind of naturally predisposed to that. And you have to buy in. And there's just a huge swath of people who are going to see that thumbnail and be like, oh, I love Selena Gomez. Oh, I love Zoe Saldana. Like, let's check this out. It's the most popular on the service. And it is an acquired taste. It is not, the vanilla yogurt that, I'm sure, I haven't looked, but I'm sure the number 2 is like an original Christmas, not Hallmark
Hot Frosty.
Yeah. See, exactly.
There you go.
So
that's one of those movies. That's one
I'm
of those
not even making that up.
Miranda was talking about, right?
So that just it demonstrates that Netflix is still making these awards plays, but their bread and butter is that kind of generic, here's a couple famous people in a generally inoffensive but totally uninspired plot. Whereas this film is some really famous people in a really inspired plot and a really kind of visionary, piece. And I think that it's not going to make the internet happy, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to delegitimize all the controversies PT said, because I think then if you take out, sorry, I'll put it in your terms, Jen. The normies disappear, and then you split the kind of connoisseurs of film between people who can accept those kind of controversies and those that can't. You've shrunken the audience down to a very small group of people that are going to be really enthusiastic. But as the memes and the viral nature of so many quotes demonstrates, I think there is a very passionate fan base out here behind this film.
Yeah, I watched the YouTube video of just Selena Gomez's big song, which I think is called El Camino. And all the comments were just like, we're so proud of you, Selena. Like, it's all the Selena Gomez stans in a way that was like kind of unsettling, where I'm like, this doesn't seem to actually be about the movie at all. Like, or some of the comments that I hear a lot, and this includes from critics as well, that Selena Gomez is like really kind of like getting out of her comfort zone, doing something unconventional compared to the rest of her career, and that people are kind of applauding her for doing that. For every person who says that, there's another person who says that she's actively bad in the movie and like is not really her, and either because of the performance or because the character they think is underwritten. So yeah, it's interesting because I think the controversy surrounding this movie, at least based on how I've absorbed it so far, can fall into a few different buckets, but it's all kind of swirling around in the same mix. You know what I mean? Like, because some of it is specifically about people who think this movie is politically regressive. So I've definitely heard a lot of comparisons to Green Book and Crash, which I think is taking it too far. Like I even though I enjoyed the movie, I want to be open to, okay, how do you think this film is misrepresenting transgender people or the experience, and like why is this a harmful representation? And like, so I'm open to that, but like people going so far to be like this is like Green Book or Crash, I think is taking it too far, because I think there is more ambiguity in terms of the representation that you can parse through. The other bucket seems to be sort of about PT's major complaint that like the story's all over the place, the screenplay doesn't work, like that, like kind of the more structural issues. So some people have problems with that. Don't like say the movie is an abomination. I think I was listening to the In Session Film podcast this morning, and they use the word abomination. So there's some people who don't even like need to get to the trans discourse. They're just as a structurally as a movie, they have a problem with this, or the sort of tonal mixing of the different, either the mixing of the different genres, or how it kind of like seems almost close to parody in one scene, like the Plastic Surgeon song. People are like, isn't that like just overtly parody? And then whereas like other scenes seem very serious, and so people don't know what to make of the kind of tone of it. So yeah, I think it's this movie in particular, I think, is tricky because not all the discourse is focusing on one particular thing. So that'll make it an interesting award season for sure.
I think this episode should we should continue the trend of interviewing each other about this. Jen, I have a question. At what speed do you listen to podcasts? Because I feel like you always have listened to like 8 different podcast episodes about the movie that we
listen
discussing.
At regular speed.
Wow.
I don't speed it up.
I'm jealous of all the. I feel like you also have new podcasts almost every time we're talking about it. I've never heard of the In Session.
I have I have like a rotation of like probably 4 or 5 podcasts that I always listen to, no matter, like movie podcasts that I always listen to no matter what. Right? There's like Big Picture, Little Gold Men, Next Best Picture, Mike and Oscar. Probably Gold Derby now is in that rotation, and then there's kind of like a B team of like, oh, if I run out of if those podcasts don't have new episodes out, then I and I know we're going to cover a movie, to get a comprehensive sense of the discourse, I try to listen to as many as possible. So
thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
So I will say that was bad to have that tangent, because I did have a couple things just in response that I had saved from Letterboxd, which I'm not, not to read like a long thing necessarily. The first one's longer, second one's very short. I'll only read part of this first one. That like our voices, I don't want to bring them in as like, I didn't like this that much, and here's like backup from someone else. These are legitimately things that like I would not have necessarily been able to speak to or whatever. This is not to support or me necessarily, but just to say from these outside voices, this is from a comrade Yui YUI on Letterboxd, who gave Emilia Pérez a 0.5 star, which is some may say is harsh. And the beginning of it is so alienated from the experience of lived trans identity that it gets many basic facts wrong, stuff that any trans person could tell you about. But even disregarding that, this is yet another Crash-esque panorama of trying to tackle every societal problem and then acting as if the mere effort of that attempt, rather than the actual result, is profound. Liberal centrists can seemingly only understand queerness as the exceptional to their normality, so they make a hyperbolic spectacle out of us and then go on to say that it's good optics, that it's representation, when in fact it is abstraction and dehumanization. So, I mean, all perspective, but that's where I first saw the Crash parallel. And then a different perspective from Sergio Munoz Esquier said, of course, all the gringos clapped at the end. Which again, that's like there is a deeper strand of people being like, oh, someone who's never been to Mexico and has never thought about it. is an issue, and people are really feeling that. I will also note as my final letterbox entry for this, to speak to your Stan point about Selena, is that there's not just Selena Gomez, but her potential rival, which we'll get to in Best Supporting Actress. It has another person with stands, is Ariana Grande. And I saw, but now I don't know where it is. I can see if I can go find it. A bunch of screenshots people had of new Letterboxd accounts that only have 2 reviews. One of them is Emilia Pérez and one of them is Wicked. One of them gets half a star. The other one gets 5 stars. And it's just like split. Because there's
in both directions.
There's Ariana Grande stands doing it one way and Selena Gomez stands doing it the other way.
Oh, it's on.
It's part of a Oscar analysis discourse of like, you can't look at the Letterboxd reviews for these movies because it's just wild. It's wild in different ways.
No, go back to Rotten Tomatoes. Get out of Letterboxd. We don't want you here. We don't want these shenanigans.
Oh.
Boo.
But we get mad at me for saying normies, and then you say that. So okay, I have 2 things to follow up with that. One is, I can't remember. It might have been Pop Culture Happy Hour. I can't remember which podcast it was. There was a podcast that had a trans and Latina critic on the panel that they had brought on just to talk about this movie. And she was saying and I was like, that's hard to argue. She pointed to the lyrics in the song where the son is saying that that Emilia smells like his father, right? And there's a particular lyric that was like, and the critic was like, he literally says, you smell like mezcal and guacamole. And she was like, if that's not a Mexican stereotype, like what is? And I was like, oh, I can kind of see that now. And she was just saying like the list of things that in that song are just all like very stereotypical things that we associate, that someone not some non-Mexican person would associate with Mexico. So yeah, the critiques are there. I think, but then at the same time, and I think again, this is sort of why discourse is tricky to navigate. Next Best Picture had a trans critic that really loved the movie and thought that it was very like emotionally resonant with her about her experience transitioning and what that was like and the struggles of that. So they're kind of like, the representation argument I've seen kind of made on both sides, positive and negative. Can I explain my opera theory and why everything makes a lot more sense through the lens of opera? Okay.
Is there any further information about how that trans critic tricked her way back into her children's life?
Oh, all right.
Sorry, Jen. Continue your opera theory.
Okay, characters can be flawed. Okay, no one's saying they can't be. If we think about opera, and actually, if it's an easier lens through which to think about this, also Shakespeare, a big trope or device that is often used is the mistaken identity, right? So, to me, the ending of this movie makes the most sense. Like that scene where Selena Gomez's character and Emilia are kind of like huddled together, and what's Selena Gomez's character's name?
Jesse.
I don't remember. Jesse, thank you. Jesse realizes that Emilia is or was her husband, right? Manitas. And then it's too late because they're both going to die, right? Like, to me, that I was like, the only way that makes sense is like we've been working towards this like operatic tragedy this whole time, right? Of like and in some ways, and again, this doesn't make it good at all necessarily, but I do think that it's very possible Jacques Audiard was like, I want to make this opera, but I want to make it like contemporary opera. Oh, what if I make Emilia's transition from a man to a woman kind of sub in for what in like, Much Ado About Nothing, or like, well, that's the comedy, so that's not a good comparison, but like where a character doesn't realize who the other person is, and then when they realize, it's too late, right? like what if we just kind of swap, and that's not the reason that that's bad, I think, is because it's not thinking about all of the fallout from like making that choice. but I think it does make the sort of the very basic plot. Like if you listed all the plot points in this movie, they make sense as an opera, like or as kind of this sort of like more Shakespearean tragedy, where we have these characters who have these and then like even Zoe Saldana's character Rita makes sense in that context, right? Because she's kind of as the lawyer, she's kind of like the steward kind of character. You know what I mean? Like the go-between, right? Like, I don't know. Again, that doesn't necessarily make it better, but to me, like the choices just made a lot more sense. And so it is very possible that this movie is not really supposed to be about the trans experience specifically. It's just kind of like it just happens to have a character who is transgender in it. And obviously that still could mean it's a harmful representation. I think it's probably like, I kept trying to think about what would the response to this film's representation of transgender people be if we had already had a bunch of trans actors and actresses starring in films. You know what I mean? Like if this weren't one of the first big movies that everybody sees that has a trans character, right? Like, would it be different? Would we be putting less pressure on it to speak to that experience, I guess?
I don't think Emilia Perez strives to be a representation of like the trans experience any more than like the Birdcage strove to be a representation of like the gay experience. A trans character is at the center, and her transition is a key element of the plot, as you pointed out, Jen. But the film makes clear as soon as Zoe Saldana breaks into song that we're well outside the realm of realism, and that this film isn't trying to accurately or acutely examine the plight of real trans people in society today. So, I mean, I think that all of these criticisms are absolutely fair. And again, like I think that sometimes when a piece of art like makes like these kinds of swings and makes these kinds of mistakes, it's useful to have discourse about it. It's part of what makes the text like rich and interesting, talking about the mistakes as much as we talk about its virtues. I don't think a piece of art has to be totally unproblematic for us to also still love it and still be able to find something to connect to within it.
I agree. I mean, having brought some of those voices in to, again, not to be like checkmate. This movie's bad. And again, I don't even think it's bad. There's many things about it that I enjoyed. I'm going to be advocating for it to win awards when we get to the award part. But what I will say in response to that is I agree. This is not trying to make like a statement, let alone the statement on trans identity. Maybe when this was in development, like that was less of a fraught culture like touchstone, where like it didn't know it was going to come out in the middle of a big culture war where huge tectonic shifts in society were going to be built on the backs of this small subsection of a population who were being marginalized and targeted, which is that's unfortunate for everyone, but particularly for those people, but also for this movie. I do think like one part like that sort of brings it together that I was like particularly didn't care for thematically was it did sort of feel like the trans narrative of I have to go and become my true self, and like that's my way of bettering, was also parallel to like Mexico. Shouldn't you be better? Like, shouldn't you be like not violent, and shouldn't you have like where you're supporting each other and all of that? And like again, that feels like on a like a satellite view, you're just sort of like, sure, like why not? Like this individual can represent the society and improvement, but like not to say that you can't like tell stories about people that are not you. Like this cis white man from France should be able to tell whatever story he wants. But it like I feel like the fact that they intertwine so much, especially by the final like few minutes of the movie, feels like it's just sort of like you didn't get any of this. Like you don't know what you're talking about. And I kind of was feeling that without having that connection. So I understand the people who are more invested and live in those communities and those groups might be rolling their eyes a little bit about all of that. I do want to stop because I don't want to be negative anymore. But I'll say this as the last thing now that we are here deep in spoiler mode. That it's like, to me, the issue with the plot isn't that it is grandiose, and it isn't that like it takes all these things are taking these big swings, and the characters, and despite the earlier interpretation, I understand. I want to sing things all the time in real life. I like seeing people do it when it feels like, yes, this all makes sense. The problem for me with this movie on a basic structural level is it keeps introducing things that are like, isn't this interesting? And they sing a song about it, and that never comes up again.
Yeah.
The big example is El Mal, which is like in position right now to be the song from the movie, which is we started this, this NGO. We're trying to find the lost people from the cartel, but you're taking money from dirty people. Rita the lawyer is mad about that, but Emilia is like, no, but we have to do that. And it's like, well, how is that going to be reconciled? It's not. We're never going to talk about it again. We're going to sing a song, and it's literally never going to be mentioned. And there are like, I don't know, like at least a handful, and like I would say like half of the songs like feel like they're setting up a conflict or setting up a character development, but then in the end, looking back, it's like, no, that was it. That was the whole thing. That was the whole time they talked about it. It didn't mean anything. It didn't go anywhere. And by the time I realized that and accumulated over the course of the movie, I was like, oh, so what were we doing? Like, what exactly was happening? So I don't know, maybe that is like a fragmentary narrative thing that's like, people can react well to. But I think that if I liked the package of the songs and the way in which people were like, going into it, like I liked a lot of the visuals, and again, I liked a lot of the performances, but it just felt like it was all kind of like a first draft of ideas of a story that didn't come together. The end. I'm done.
So I do agree with you. In my viewing experience, I was way more on board with everything up until right after the scene where Emilia meets with Rita again. That scene is great. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see what happens next. And then when they start the nonprofit, then it like opens up the story to be so big that I was just like, wait, what? Like, what is happening? And I agree that like, I totally agree with that. I think this movie tries to be like pulling at all these different threads, and then it's just got a big ball of yarn. And it's like, I don't know what to do now. And so I agree with that, but, and again, this is my small way to counter what you're saying. So I do think the genre mashing to a certain extent unlocks why the movie feels like it has to put all these things in conversation to one another. And I think it's because it is seeing crime thrillers or like kind of like, the sort of violent cartel kind of Sicario-esque like drama. It's seeing that as coded masculine, and then musicals as coded feminine, and that it's sort of showing that like, because we're assuming that those genres have those genders, that you can't be both, or you can't go from one to the other. And I think it's trying to sort of contextualize Emilia's transition in those terms, because there's a particular lyric in one of the song that Antonio's riffed off of in the opening, when Rita is talking to the surgeon. She says something like, when you've been raised with like violence and kind of like to kill, it's you have to dance or die, I think is what she says, right? And to me, I think to the film seemed like it was trying to use genre as a way to kind of like I think you're not wrong, PT, to parallel the Mexico and its sort of corruption and violence and problems and stuff like that with sort of Emilia's inner turmoil, because I think Emilia felt like, in the way that she felt like she was trapped into being a man when she really when she really was a woman, is the same as Mexico feeling trapped in its corrupt society, right? Or like in the criminal underworld kind of. And like, so I think that it doesn't totally hold up, but like, that's the way that you explain why all of these things are in the same movie. Whether or not it holds together is another question, I think. But yeah, that's what I got. That's the best I can do. PT's faces says it's not enough.
Hi, I'm still on the microphones too.
Oh, sorry, Greg.
I think it's been a half hour. No, I'm just teasing. The one thing I want to say is, I see that you're both talking about this kind of fuzzy parallel relationship between the individual and the country, and both expressing doubt about that's success. And I will say that I think the problem is I didn't read it like as didactically as you both have in this. You're kind of saying that the film is to some degree saying like, straighten out your house, Mexico, just like this person needs to straighten out their house. But I interpreted it more generously as just like, this is what identity is. And I think, again, I'll play the culture card to say like, this is what identity is in Mexico. And it's like, our society is these things, and we can't ignore any part of it if we're going to not like reckon with our true selves and think about that. It's more successful, but it really made me think about Almodovar's Parallel Mothers, which has this like very specific, plot going on. And then it's like, oh, right. And we also have to reconcile with genocide. And I have the fortune of being from a place where genocide is not part of my identity and needing to reconcile with it. All right, fine. America committed. Yeah, yes, we can open it up. But like, I'm saying specifically day to day, I don't think a lot about those things. But
must be nice.
Yes. So I do think that, when we sit and we think about the ways in which we're kind of peeking into the identities of this culture and this individual, I do think the film just wants to acknowledge that this is what true reckoning would be, right? PT's very funny joke just now, it must be nice, is like what the filmmaker is saying to everybody else, right? Must be nice if you don't have to come up with the rest of this or an explanation of all this and how it's a part of you and your heritage and your identity. And again, I know I'm speaking from a place of privilege when I say some of these things, but it's meant to kind of reckon with the fact that like, identity is hard. And I think if the film's big swings are trying to say anything, it's just like, in some ways, like, let it be messy. Like, life's hard enough without making it be neat. And just because I missed that part of the conversation, I just want to say, like, none of that takes away from the point that, right now, I'm sure you have the same thing. I have a lot of students writing on trans rights in my classes, and these like fake narratives out there that some high schooler is getting their sex change operation so they can win like collegiate swimming. It's just like insane and disgusting and horrible. And yet I do think this film problematically may kind of borrow from that same discourse where it's like, how to get away with all your drug crimes, you like completely disappear through a sex change operation. And like that's not what the film is trying to be. I just see that problematic reductive readings of it can make it participate in that same discourse. So I don't think it's innocent, but I also don't think it's guilty in that regard.
I can confirm I have heard that reading, that I think the least generous reading is that Manitas only becomes Emilia in order to escape, like to basically, it's like the witness protection program, like start a new life, and has nothing to do with how they identify their gender. And I think for me, there was enough in the beginning of the film that convinced me that this is something that they were like, I know that, like Manitas was like, I know this sounds crazy. And maybe if I hadn't just watched Will and Harper, because I feel like a lot of the language that gets used in terms of describing the feeling of living in a body that does not represent your gender, it just made sense to me, where I was like, yes, like this character wants to transition for authentic reasons as opposed to legal reasons.
As the least generous person here, that is way too ungenerous to this movie. Like that, I don't think that's there at all. I think the potential, to me, I thought the floor for ungenerous was this person became a violent criminal because of their gender identity issues. And like, because they were not able to fulfill their sort of true self, they had to become a cartel leader because that's Mexico. And so like, that's kind of what I thought was the like crappy way of thinking about this. But apparently there's a deeper floor. So I almost feel better about the negative things I think about this.
All right, I think we need to go to Oscars Watch, because this is, despite its polarizing nature, a very, very strong Oscar contender. a perfect song to play after talking about drug cartel violence. That's good. Right? So this film, I just want to kind of lay out there what this film has already achieved in terms of awards attention, and then open it up to what do you think. So it did win Best Actress. You may recall if you were listening to our post-Cannes episodes, all 4 actresses, Carla Sofia Gascon, Selena Gomez, Adriana Paz, who we never actually talked about. Again, I think that the romance was yet another layer where I was like, we don't have time for this. Like, what do you...
Can't wait to find out what this means. Oh, nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Right. All right.
And Zoe Saldana, they all 4 won, which is not a normal thing. Usually it's one person that wins Best Actress at Cannes. It also won the jury prize. And apparently the soundtrack, they have a soundtrack award that it won as well, which I didn't know at the time. I didn't hear about that. The other thing I'll say is that a lot of Oscar pundits are pointing to the European Film Awards, which only recently were even on my radar. Like, I feel like this is a new thing that we now talk about because the Academy has become more international. People are really searching for ways to figure out, okay, what is the European voting bloc going to do? That it has been nominated for Best Film, Director, Screenwriter. Carla Sofia Gascon nominated for Actress. It apparently has somehow already won editing. I don't know why that one is decided, but not the other ones.
That's the governor's ball or whatever, the regional
right. Yeah, maybe
district managers award, whatever they call it.
Yeah, and Emilia Pérez in Toronto was the runner-up for the audience award. So like, it has gotten a lot of love already. European Film Awards, I will also note, is if you trace back, that's where we would have seen the signs for Anatomy of a Fall's Best Screenplay win, because it won that. So that's the kind of like, people are like, see, these matter. So yeah, it's saying all that, but then also weighing our entire conversation where we talked about how divisive this movie is. Like, how is that going to shake out in the Oscar race, do you think?
I will say, this is so going to get cut out of the episode, but I was watching the show Bad Monkey the other day. Have you seen this show? It's a Apple TV Plus show by Bill Lawrence, and it's based on a Carl Hiaasen novel. And they played the steel drum version of PIMP, and I had like trauma flashbacks. I was like, whoa, like why are we hearing this song? And Rachel was like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is a huge part of a really important movie to me. So it's so hard because I think that Zoe Saldana is the standout, and yet I don't know that I'm really willing to put money down on her. I will take her over Selena Gomez as the nominee, but I do think that there's both a lot to the Emilia Pérez part, and that the Academy loves a good kind of progressive nomination, right? So I think there is a faction of the Academy that very rightfully wants to start challenging these gendered acting categories. My read on the Academy is nobody likes them and the political stance they take, but nobody has a better solution to them, right? And so it seems to me that really nominating the lead actress would be one way to start that process and to start that conversation. And I think it's probably time to have a more serious version of that conversation. But then I think, the Academy is, the parts that are not European and international are very conservative. And so I think I'm going to put my money on Zoe Saldana for getting a Best Supporting Actress nomination. Is that what she's up for? Or is she up for lead? Sorry.
No, you're correct.
I think supporting.
Okay.
Is that category fraud?
I mean, you could easily argue it's a two-hander.
I don't think so.
In at least the first act, she has way more screen time than Carla Sofia Gascon does.
But then her role in the plot becomes much less important in the second and third act. So I think they're in the right categories. I think that there's going to be support for this. I think that there's enough passionate support that that will propel it to a lot of nominations. I think I have its ceiling at 11. Supporting actress lead actress, picture, director, song, adapted screenplay, cinematography, editing, makeup, score, and sound. That's the ceiling. I don't know that it's going to get all of those, but I think it's going to get a lot of those. And again, that's not necessarily going to translate to wins. I think Zoe Saldana. I actually think Carla Sofia Gascon has a good chance too, honestly, because I think that as much as people love Mikey Madison and Honora, that also that's maybe too sexy a performance to give a best actress Oscar for. So I don't know. I think it has a lot of potential. What do the rest of you think?
I mean, I think that's right. The ceiling's quite high. The ceiling might be higher than that because again, it's not the be all end all, but I like to have it as a checkpoint. Currently at Gold Derby, it does have 11 nominations. Like if you look at the cutoffs, but it's because that has two songs right now that are being expected for it. El Mal and Mi Camino. It's the Zoe Saldana song and then a Selena Gomez song. Will they both make it in? That I don't know. It has it also has Selena Gomez in the top 10 for supporting actress. I don't know if that would hold. But yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if it doesn't end up with like, more than 6. Like I think that it's I think picture, actress, and supporting actress are pretty locked in, and then it has enough but production and cinematography and editing. I think it has enough there to like push forward. There doesn't seem to be it has a things above it in a bunch of those categories that are like 1 or 2 movies that are like, well, that movie's locked in and likely going to be vying for the win. But Emilia Pérez is solidly third in the same way that it won the jury prize at Cannes, which is third place. I think that's a good. There's a couple of movies above it and a few things, but I also think that like as of right now, like if I were putting money down, I would be I would be confident out of any of the acting categories that Zoe Saldana might be a Davine Joy Randolph or Robert Downey Jr. who just marches from the January through and just like always winning. You know what the speech is going to be like, but there's always a tweak because I'm sure she's going to be great at it. That like that she's just going to march, and I think song is going to win too because the biggest thing that will knock it off there might be some. There is this controversy. There is some pushback. I'm not saying it as a value judgment, but if there are people who are like, this is Crash, this is Green Book, this is Driving Miss Daisy, guess what all those movies did? Win a bunch of Oscars. So like there's that's a good thing in this category for them, this zone. And so the other people will be like, no, like this is good. I think the bigger issue, not to open this door, is that if Wicked Part 1 is incredible, is that the musical? And then they're like, that's a freaking movie. Who needs this? But like, there's no Wicked song, right? Like, there's just not a song. There's not a new song.
Correct. There are no new songs, so there's nothing that qualifies so that feels to be an original song.
Yeah, that feels like it has song locked up. And again, like there are other strong candidates maybe
Diane
for
Warren
supporting
crying.
Actress. Just sobbing in the corner. But but I mean, there's other viable candidates for supporting actress. But like, I feel like being confident of like, even if Wicked starts getting a bunch of these technical nominations and even like it gets wins down the road, it's like, well, Emilia Pérez has song. Like we have that. And then Zoe Saldana is great. And she's so good in this. Like people who don't like this movie like Zoe Saldana. I mean, me. And so it's like, what a great job. So like we can give her that. So, 8 nominations, 2 wins. Like that's kind of what I feel like this is shaping up to be, which is great for this movie.
And if we factor in Netflix's history, they are really good at getting boatloads of nominations, not as good at getting actual wins. So I agree with the, like, it might get lots of nominations and kind of feel like a really strong contender on nomination morning. And then when it comes down to it, it's just song and supporting actress. And then that's it. Which song do you think would actually win? Because I feel like the better song of those two is El Mal, but it's like kind of too edgy for the Academy. Usually always goes with the more lyrical song.
But they're both in another language, so they'll be like, I don't know, like this. They're both fine.
But this is it's Dos Oruguitas versus We Don't Talk About Bruno. You know what I mean? Like,
but they can nominate both. And then,
but in terms of what will win.
Well, but I think El Mal will win because they're going to decide to coalesce around Zoe Saldana, and that's her flashiest performance in the movie. That's my
It's the better song. I think it's also the better song. But I actually like the Todo y Nada song if it's the second song, another Zoe Saldana song. I like that better than the Selena Gomez song too. So, but I think it'll be El Mal.
I just want to toss in, this is also going to get a big bump out of the Globes as a musical. Yes. Like, I just feel like this is the kind of thing they will nominate everyone so that they get all these super famous people at their show, because that's what the Hollywood Foreign Press or whoever they are pretending to be now that runs that organization.
You just have a mustache now, and then
yeah, exactly. HPFA. I do think that might very well help this because if you're coming out of the Globes and you get that bounce and everybody can immediately go watch it and be like, oh, that seemed fun. That musical number was kind of cool. I guess the Globes don't do musical numbers, but seeing all those famous people, I'd like to watch that. I think it could be, there's a lane there that it gets a really big bounce at the start of January and could take over Wicked again if Wicked has kind of taken the musical because I hear Wicked is very good from maybe somebody who's on this podcast. And I do think Ariana Grande is very famous. I think it's harder to see Cynthia Erivo kind of having the same following these incredibly famous established actresses do. And, I kind of alluded to it before. Zoe Saldana kind of deserves a career Oscar. If you think about if you look at the top 10 highest grossing films of all time, she's in a crazy number of them. Because, between the Avatar franchise, which I think we can all make fun of with due cause, and then from her appearances in Marvel, it's like she's kind of disappeared for a long time. And we've previously talked about The Terminal. She's fantastic in The Terminal, and that's one of her early-ish roles. And so, I just feel like it's not the case where you can say she's due, but I think she's well liked and she's done a lot in Hollywood, and we shouldn't discount the fact she's made a lot of people a lot of money as a part of those franchises. Even if nobody showed up to Avatar because it's Zoe Saldana, she contributed a huge amount to those franchises.
I'm just going to note that's a lot of disrespect to The Lioness, the Paramount Plus show that she's on that I've not seen, but apparently people who've watched it like it a lot. And I will also know this is not disrespectful, but the other major franchises, she's Lieutenant Uhura in the Kelvin timeline of Star Trek.
And is great in those. Well,
and is great in
the ones of those that are good. I don't know if anybody.
I mean, she's good in Into Darkness too, but that's not her fault. That movie's not her fault.
So my last Oscar question, and then I think we're going to wrap up, is how does this film do on a preferential ballot? So for the listeners, because this is probably our first time really talking about preferential ballot this Oscar season. So all the other categories go by, okay, who got the most votes, right? And then that person wins. For Best Picture, what they do is that if no film out of the 10 receives higher than 50% of the votes, they do this preferential ballot thing where they kind of knock out. They go to people's number 2 pick and factor those in. And they go to number 3 and they keep doing that until they get a majority winner. Since this, I could definitely see people putting this number 10 on their ballot. Does that mean it's just going to not have any hope of Best Picture?
Yeah.
People will probably might put it as 1 too, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It doesn't feel like you make it your second choice. I don't think anybody's like, I loved Anora, but that's right there at number 2, right? It just Gladiator 2 was great, and Emilia Pérez was so similar to it that I put it at number 2. Right? It just doesn't feel like a number 2 choice. I think it is people's number 1 or number 10.
Yeah, the path to that, I think the only path that I see to that happening is 49.7% of people put it 1, and then there's just enough people who put it at number 2 or 3 that get it over, and no one else is able to catch up. But I think this does not feel like one of those movies that will benefit from this, especially if Wicked's in the running and Wicked is a more widely accepted and embraced musical. I think that the chance it had before was people being just like, gosh darn it, I love movie musicals and I want to vote for that. But they have a more traditional one and one that maybe is a little more like easier to process, that they will likely see in a big screen instead of on Netflix at home. So yeah, I don't think that's likely.
All right. Well, I think we have done enough for now, at least. I'm sure we're gonna have to keep talking. We're gonna keep talking about this movie because it's gonna be an award season player. The only last thing I'll say is just like we tried our best to kind of like seek out trans critics and get kind of like people who have lived experience that can comment on the representation a little bit better. I would encourage, if you're listening to us and you made it this far, you should do the same. But yeah, otherwise, Antonio, where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
Find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can people find you?
I host and guest on a lot of weird podcasts, and I want to just plug one to this time around to say I was on a show called Force Ghost Conversations this week, which is a very good Star Wars podcast, and it was about a movie. There is a feature-length documentary on Disney Plus that is a tribute to John Williams and the music he's created, particularly with Steven Spielberg. And Anthony, the host of the very excellent Force Ghost Conversation, asked me on, and we had a really long, nerdy conversation. I think it's longer than the documentary itself is, about, all our favorite John Williams moments and tracks. And the documentary is excellent. It's not going to... I think it actually might be eligible because they put it in theaters for like a week, but I don't think it'll be part of the Oscar conversation, so won't make it onto this show this time of year. But it's well worth people's time, and I've already said everything I could possibly say about it, so find it there.
We can add a documentary category to the Letters Awards.
That's true. Yeah.
I'm into it.
And I will just say elsewhere on the internet, I'm Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. I took extra long this time, but PT, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me at Letterboxd at PTMCNIFF. You can also find the show there at LTR Pod or on various other social media sites at The Long Take Review, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. You can send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. And you can also subscribe wherever you're listening right now. Just subscribe and then rate and review and increase our visibility. Tell your friends, tell your loved ones who want long conversations about movies. We're here. We're ready to have them on board. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads, Sobchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. And I just want to make a plug for, if you're looking for some hype for Wicked, you're not going to see it until next week. I have a sort of like witch-themed review that I posted this week about Agatha All Along and its connections to The Wizard of Oz and Wicked. So that's there if you're at all interested. Normally I don't bring up those reviews, but since it is connected to a movie that we are inevitably going to have to review, maybe PT doesn't get invited to that because he doesn't like musicals, but
I was going to say you get to review it.
PT.
You're the one who said we had to not talk about specific movies during this closer. But fine, we can. No, that's okay. That's okay. We can talk about it. No, but I probably won't be on that episode because I assume you're going to try to do it next week right after it hits, and I will be traveling. So let's just say I'm very happy for everybody involved that they had a great time. I bet it's better than another movie. That's all I'll say.
Aquí estamos. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.